China's Defense Minister Dong Jin is in Singapore, the first time he's in the city-state since being appointed to the role in December. Now, he's also attending the Shangri-La Dialogue. It's a high-level security forum that involves defense chiefs from all around the world. And he will be speaking about China's approach to global security on Sunday. Mr. Tong was given a ceremonial welcome at Singapore's Ministry of Defence. He was accompanied by Singapore Defence Minister Ng Yen Hen. Later, both men co-chaired the Singapore-China Defence Ministers' dialogue, and they reaffirmed the positive momentum in defence relations. Both also expressed support for upcoming defence exercises this year. They said that these enable both sides to strengthen professional and people-to-people ties, as well as enhance mutual trust and understanding. The Chinese defense chief will have the opportunity to meet his American counterpart in Singapore this weekend. And this meeting will mark the first face-to-face discussion between both defense chiefs in 18 months. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will deliver plenary remarks at the Shangri-La Dialogue and is also expected to reassure Asian allies about his country's commitment to the region. Washington's envoy is likely to focus on pressing security issues such as Israel's war in Gaza and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But on the sidelines, he is scheduled to meet with Singapore's new Prime Minister, Lawrence Wong, and other senior officials. Well, for more on the upcoming Shangri-La Dialogue, let's speak to CNA's China correspondent Olivia Seong in our studio. We have our Japan correspondent Michio Ishida, and also joining us online, William Chung of IC's Yusof Ishak Institute. Now, Dr. Chung is a senior fellow in Regional Strategic and Political Studies program. Well, thanks so very much for joining us. First question to you first, Dr. Chung. So, the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is set to arrive in Singapore later. It's his 10th trip to the Indo-Pacific. Given that all that's happening, from what's happening in Ukraine to Gaza to the South China Sea and Taiwan, lots to talk about. What do you think will be on Secretary Austin's priority list going to this security forum in Asia?
Well, Tali, I think you're asking me to have a sneak peek into Secretary Austin's prepared text of his speech, but unfortunately, I don't have that. What I can tell you is that he will go along, as per previous U.S. defense secretaries, along two major lines, which is basically sketching kind of the geopolitical challenges and threats that are facing the region, including the South China Sea, Taiwan, and of course, as you say, Israel and Hamas in Gaza and the war in Ukraine, and sketching even the very kind of challenging strategic landscape that we find ourselves today. And two, of course, he will probably quite likely talk about the U.S. and its reinvigorated alliances and partnerships in the region with countries like Japan, Australia, India, ASEAN, many regional countries. And thirdly, I guess every U.S. Secretary of Defense will take a poke at kind of challenges to the status quo, and that goes without saying. It will be China and kind of its assertive actions that we've seen not only in the South China Sea, but also Taiwan and also in the East China Sea.
Yeah, Dr. Chung, well, that was a pretty good sneak peek into what Mr. Austin's prepared speech will be. But Michio, what we do know at the moment is that the Pentagon has actually said that Mr. Austin, he will be attending trilateral talks with his South Korean and Japanese counterparts while he's here in Singapore. So that comes shortly after the two East Asian countries held a trilateral with China over the weekend. So do you think this is like a charm offensive?
Well, Telly, the framework of Japan, China, South Korea trilateral talks used to be Team China and South Korea versus Japan. Now, China and South Korea both were victims of Japanese aggression during the past war, and South Korea continued to insist on Japan's compensation even after its completion, based on the 1965 bilateral agreement. But since President Yoon Suk-yeol came to power, Japan and South Korean ties improved. And as both are U.S. allies, Japan, South Korea, U.S. cooperation, especially the framework and security strengthened. Now, remember in the Japan-China-South Korea talks earlier this week, the agreement was basically on people-to-people exchange and cultural area sustainability and cooperation with ASEAN. There was no mentioning of a defense-related agreement in the joint declaration. Now, let's get your thoughts, Dr. Chun. China and the U.S. held maritime consultations earlier this week where Beijing warned Washington to avoid forming cliques to contain China by sea. That clique is likely referring to Japan, South Korea, and other U.S. partners as there are tensions over Taiwan and the South China Sea. Now, how would U.S. partners likely to respond to this warning?
That's a great question. My very simple answer to that is that China has issued all kinds of warnings about cliques and blocs and coalitions for the longest time, especially with U.S. and its ally actions in the South China Sea. So just to answer your question, I doubt very much that the U.S. and its allies will give much weight to all these Chinese warnings. I mean, if you read enough newspapers and media outlets, they are full of, they're chock-a-block with Chinese warnings on the South China Seas, 365 days a year, 24/7. The U.S. will probably keep a very measured line in making sure that there's a so-called coalition of the willing that is here and available. And I think one of the acronyms that we are quite familiar with nowadays is something called the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which comprises Australia, Japan, India, and the United States. And they will continue to do what they continue to do all this time. And the U.S. will stress that it will fly where international law allows in international waters.
Olivia, let's bring you in now. We know that there will be a flurry of diplomatic activities over the weekend. China's defense minister, he's been busy today, but all eyes, I suppose, will be on his meeting with the defense chief of the U.S., the big meeting. And Dr. Chung was saying that, U.S. will keep a very measured line, but how much... Are we looking for a subtle thaw in relation here, or how much of it is actually going to move the needle in a nutshell between, U.S.-China relations?
Well, we're talking to observers to get a sense of how they think this big meeting will go. There's a lot at stake, obviously, but I think the consensus seems to be that the fact that the defense chiefs of China and the U.S., the fact that they are meeting is a win in itself, that it will help progress and help both sides to manage their differences on the security front. But we do have to note that we are still waiting for final confirmation that this meeting is going to happen, but the groundwork has certainly been laid for it. We know that the two defense chiefs already spoke over the phone in April. That was the first time that they were speaking to each other after Dong Jun was appointed to the post back in December last year, after the previous Chinese defense minister was abruptly removed from his post. But observers are also saying that probably we won't expect anything very substantive from these talks. We will likely hear China and the U.S. continue to reiterate their positions on rather thorny issues that they will have to talk about, whether it's over Taiwan, given those recent drills that Beijing had around the island, or whether it comes to the South China Sea, Beijing angered by U.S. activities in the waters, which it sees as provocation. So what we will be looking out for, though, is the tone, whether it's just a symbolic reiteration of positions or will there be an escalation. But Dr. Chung, we also know that this year is an election year in the U.S. How much do you think that's going to factor into Secretary Austin's remarks and how it handles its engagement with China? And how much will China have that on its mind when they meet?
Well, I guess just the short answer of that to that, Olivia, is that there's not going to be much of an impact the U.S. domestic audience. You know that in every presidential election, foreign affairs and international politics is not quite the purview of the typical American voter. And the big issues that pop up will be stuff like China, jobs, tariffs, the WTO, and whatnot. So if you think about what Austin can probably talk about, it wouldn't have very much import to the American voter, except that when it comes to tacky issues like U.S. technology and export controls on China. But I think that, just to answer your question about China will take every advantage that it can. And I think one of these advantages is recently the Biden administration announced a new raft of tariffs on electric vehicles and semiconductors on China, what China can do is actually say that, hey, we are taking the moral high ground. We're not going to retaliate. We're not going to impose tariffs, counter tariffs on the United States. And perhaps that might gain them some political brownie points way back in the United States.
Mitchell, we're hearing that there is a possibility that that Japan and the new defense ministers of China, they're going to be holding a bilateral meeting for the first time. Can you confirm it? And also what's likely to come out of it?
Well, that's what I've been hearing from the defense ministry, that they will meet for the first time face to face. And the Japanese defense ministry said that Japan wants to discuss regional issues and defense exchanges between the two countries. Now, Defense Minister Minoru Kihara is expected to directly state his concern on Chinese Coast Guard ships spending record amount of time around the Senkakus in the East China Sea, which China also claims and calls Diaoyu. Now, risk around the Taiwan Strait is also raising worries as Beijing held a large-scale military drill recently. And Japan's Yonaguni Island is just around 100 kilometers away from Taiwan. So instability on the Taiwan Straits could impact Japan. But regarding defense exchanges between Japan and China, for the first time in 5 years, Chinese Liberation Army members visited Japan this month and was given a guide around a self-defense force, air and ground force bases. So Japan is expected to encourage such exchanges to avert any possible mishap.
Right, and we'll certainly be looking out for all these discussions on the sidelines. That's going to be very interesting as well. Thanks so very much, Olivia, as well as Michio, and of course, William Chung of IC's Yusof Ishak Institute Senior Fellow and Regional Strategic and Political Studies Program. Thanks so very much for your time and thoughts.